when I talked about resonance and I talked about it is literally a resounding. When something's resounding, it's sounding back to you, meaning it's echoing. So everybody has a frequency that they naturally operate at. And what will happen through force resonance or entrainment, which are just things that happen. I'll give an example. You walk into your job and immediately you recognize that your natural frequency and the frequency of the place you're entering is different. So you do what? You code switch. You walk into a party and you say, you know what? If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to have to get a drink. And you automatically try to adapt yourself to the frequency that you're entering into, right? And so that's the sign is those things aren't resonating with me naturally. So I'm gonna try to force myself into that resonance, or at least exist on some level of harmony, right? Harmony is complementary, resonance is same. Okay, so over time we do this. We go to school, we do this. We go to work, we do this. We're in certain friend groups. Our mom pulls us to church that we don't resonate. Whatever it is that happens over time, we actually lose our natural resonant frequency and we start to adapt to what's around us.
Welcome to the Mindful Rebel podcast, your refuge for personal growth. We're all on a journey to reconnect and nurture the most authentic parts of ourselves. And in this podcast, we explore how these modern day rebels are using mindfulness to transform themselves and the world around them. Each episode will dive deep into personal interviews with social impact healers, teachers, creatives, and leaders. Through their stories and insights, you'll engage with powerful teachings to spark your mind, prompts to ignite your reflection, and techniques to integrate wisdom into your daily lives. Make sure you like, subscribe, review, and share this podcast while joining us at the intersection of mindfulness and social change that challenges the status quo, awakens our collective wisdom, and creates a world with peace, clarity, and freedom. All right, welcome to the Mindful Rebel podcast. My name is Sean. I'm your host. I'm excited to be here with my good brother, Brendon Henderson. Brendon, thank you for joining me. It's good, man.
Everything is good, man. Everything is good. Everything's perfect, even if it's not good. So, we rocking with that.
I like that perspective. I want to say thank you again for taking the time. I always say this. I feel like, social media gets its negative rap, as it should in a lot of instances. But one of the, I think, silver linings is that it provides space for us to connect to folks that are across the country, across the world in different ways. And I think when I found your Instagram page, and I feel like I found it through another person's page across, it was exciting to see another brother sort of in this space doing this work, not only just in the wellness space, but then also I'm like, oh shit, he's a sound healer too.
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, I definitely want to pick your brain and talk a little bit more about your work as well. So thank you for making the time and space.
Yeah, I think you're the second Black male sound healer I ever met or ever saw. So I was like, yeah, okay, let's talk for sure.
We here now.
Yeah,
So I
word.
think a great place for us to start is, I know you do a lot of work as a multidisciplinary healing artist. Like, what brought you along that journey? And I know that that's a very loaded question. I say this to all my guests, but I think it's always a great space to sort of set context to your work that you do. So, like, what put you on that path to where you are now doing the work that you're sharing with the world?
Yeah, there was a couple catalysts that were more turns or accelerators on the path, but I always tell people I was never not on the path. And I say that because I remember feeling very spiritually inclined as a kid. I remember one time when I was 5 years old, my mom's car wouldn't start. And I literally asked her, like, do you believe? And she's like, what? And I was like, I believe, but I need you to believe. And if we believe together, your car will start. And she was like, okay, I believe. And her car started. So like, that's why I say I was never not on the path, but I didn't know my outlet. I didn't understand that I was also supposed to do it with and for other people. So I first learned to meditate when I was in college. So let's say 1920. And shout out Andrew Shell, by the way, my homie who taught me that. But I was going inward and understanding things. And then after college, I had this woman that lived across the hall from me who would break down religious texts in her spare time and kind of give me a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm like, hey, do you see like these themes across these different texts? And so I'm digging into the bunch of different ancient Sumerians and the Anunnaki and how that relates to the Bible and see this in the Torah and all this stuff. And I thought it was just a personal journey. And then even to get closer to what I'm doing now, when I first started doing my first version of quote unquote sound healing was me humming and maybe touching somebody's joint and just not even just having the instinct to do it, not knowing it was a thing. And then somebody calls it sound healing or somebody calls it energy healing. I'm like, oh, okay, let me investigate that. So it was more of those things, but I will say there was a one catalyst moment in particular that I remember. Um, I'll call this an accelerator. I was in New York. I lived in New York at the time, and I was catching my everyday train, but the train didn't work. I see somebody in the train station who's trying to catch the same train, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. So we just collaborate on, okay, what if we took this train to this train? We was starting at the same stop and getting off at the same stop. So we're trying to figure out our path together. It was like a some type of angel or something. Like I think I've talked to this person maybe twice since. It's almost like they don't exist. But during that conversation, she's like, "Oh yeah, when I meditate, I'm able to come out of my body, see all my lives, and then drop into them." I said, "What?" She tells me about all these different things. She said, if you get a chance, the book that changed my whole perspective is Disappearing to the Universe." A couple weeks later, somebody at my job said, "Have you ever read Return to Love by Marianne Williamson?" I look at both of those books and they're both based off of the same book, which is A Course in Miracles. And so that was in 2018. And that definitely accelerated my path of like, okay, there's something else I could be tapping into here. And also, as I was doing that, people started surrounding me. So I started being of service to other people. So that was the first time somebody said, hey, I feel like you're doing something. I really want to change my life. Could you set me up a program? I didn't recognize that as my first coaching client at the time, but that's what that was, right? And so like it all happened very naturally and organically. So it wasn't one of those like near death experiences or fallouts or anything like that. It was just like I was always on a path and certain things just dropped into my life that, like I said, either tweaked it or accelerated in a different way. I know that was a mouthful.
No, 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 no. It's I appreciate what you shared because I think it's a reminder that sometimes the work that we do or the purpose, our purpose or the lane or the alignment that we're looking for has kind of always been there. But it's like sometimes as we sort of move and navigate through the world, it might get pushed to the side or it might not be in a space where we're particularly nurturing it or we recognize it. But quite often when we get into that space of alignment, then there's points to look back and like, oh, I actually see the connective tissue of what brought me here. Like this wasn't just something that just popped out of thin air. Because I had my journey was very similar where like I had to sit down, I'm like, where did all this come from? Like where and I as I got quiet and looked back, I'm like, there's been threads there, right? But now I'm in a place where I can like kind of connect the dots. So I appreciate you sharing.
You know what it was for
Um,
me too, bro? Like other people saw it, but the way that they saw it coming to life, I didn't identify with. So people would say, "Oh, you have a spiritual gift. I think you're going to be a pastor." And I'm like, "No, I don't see that for myself." And because other people's idea of what how that should manifest was placed on me, I would rebel against it and be like, "Nah, I don't even want that," because that's not I knew that didn't resonate with me. And what I needed to see was other outlets for it. And so that's what kind of changed things for me.
you know, I want to pull on one of the threads that you mentioned, and I know you mentioned that your sort of initial connection to sound healing was like connecting to like humming, and we realized like humming is a whole lane of sound healing, and there's a lot of research around like the healing aspects of humming.
Mhm.
For you, from that sort of realization to where you are now, how has your sound healing like practice and your sharing with the world, how has that evolved?
Yeah, so the very first time I can remember, I was in a home and I was like looking in a cabinet and I had a urge to just touch somebody's shoulder. And when I touched it, I just started humming and I had no idea what I was doing. And afterwards they said, "How did you know my shoulder was messed up?" I was like, "I didn't know." But she's like, "Whatever you did helped." Okay, cool. What I later found out when I actually got certified in sound healing is sound is literally everything, meaning everything is vibrating, so everything's making some sort of sound. I later found out that the cells in our body actually, they did some research about 10 to 12 years ago now that shows that they actually have antenna-like structures on each one of our cells to pick up subtle vibrations. Like when you say, "Oh, I like the vibe in here," your cells are telling you that, but also more overt things like sound baths, so or like humming or music. And that's why music affects us in the way that it does. And so my personal journey learning all this about sound and not just the metaphysical, but the actual physics behind it, the quantum physics, the biology behind it, made me a lot more um thoughtful about what sounds I allow into my space, what music I listen to, what even my own, like if I sense somebody else's vibration that doesn't is not resonant with mine, which I always tell people resonance is resounding, is resounding, means sounding back. If I'm not hearing what I'm putting out, then I'm moving into different spaces because I understand the impact of that now. So that's my whole personal thing. Is just I feel more, like I said, thoughtful and really accountable for the information for myself. But then as a leader in this space and as someone who's a sound healing practitioner, I feel accountable to teach it when I do sound bath. So I always do workshops. I very rarely will just play. I want to play and tell you why I did what I did and how it's affecting you. And I love to share it as a part of a greater healing practice, right? So like I do sound baths when I see as like more community-based work, right? And so I try to have approachable price point. I try to get as it out to as many people and get the feeling, but also the message out to as many people as possible. I actually had a sound bath last night in LA. I do one once a month in New York, and I'm trying to find like I'm doing one in Detroit soon. I'm talking to people in Atlanta. Like I'm really trying to get it out as much as I can, right? Um, but also it's a powerful thing to be coupled with other things that I do, right? So like as a coach, I actually provide private sound baths to my clients as well, right? Like I am trying to help people realize sound is everything. And so since you are sound, you're affected by sound. That's why we tune instruments. And I'm trying to tune people as much as possible to get them back to the resonant frequency. And I think it sounds hyperbolic when I talk about it, but when I say it's everything, I mean that from a science standpoint. And so I've been on fire with it, man. And I don't know if you feel this way, but when sound is a part of what you do, that's the thing that people attach themselves to the most because that has the lowest entry point in terms of understanding, right? So like I anybody in the world knows sound affects them because they turn music on in the morning or when they're about to do something important, they want to hype themselves up. So they get that. But my thing has been is trying to get people to understand sound is just a part of what I do, even though I talk about it as everything it is, but that's setting up everything else, if that makes sense. So yeah.
No,
Another long-winded answer, man.
no,
You
you're
got me
fine. You're
talking.
fine. And I was, as you were saying that, I was like, damn, I feel seen, because I feel like that too, right? Because, and I'll even say this, like for me, like actually meditation is really my entry point into the space. And it's actually like, I feel like meditation is my baby, right? Like I feel like
Hmm.
that's the thing that I love to really share. And it just so happens that I feel like I'm not, I want to say like cornered as the sound healing guy, but it feels like that's the thing that people typically are looking for in that way. And so for me, I know a few years I was kind of fighting it where I'm like,
Mm.
I'm here to teach, I'm gonna teach meditation. Like I want to,
Yeah, yeah,
but folks are looking for the sound healing piece. But I had to pause on that to realize, to your point, that sound often is a beautiful entry point for folks into the space, right? Because for the most part, we all can point back to some way in which music or sound or vibration has had a deep impact on us, right? And
mhm,
so realizing that, like, I'm very similar in terms of like my work is really rooted in wanting to share this with community, with people that look like us. And so that is maybe the easier way to get folks in the door. And then it's like, I'm gonna hit you over the head with some meditation and some
yeah,
yoga and all the other things, some Reiki, all the other things. But I know that sound is what will get folks in. And so, I appreciate you sharing that because I was like, oh, somebody else feels that way. Yeah, that's
100%, bro. Like the sound bath I did last night, we started with. It's always jarring for people because I'm like, all right, it's starting, and then it's a 15-minute silent meditation. And they're like, wait, I thought this was a sound bath. We get into that. The last one I did in New York, we did qigong to start. You know what I mean? And it was silent so people could get into their breath and just hear themselves. So I do mix multimodality now into what I'm doing, but I'm also going to give you sound, and it's going to be thoughtful. I'm going to think about the elements and the energy centers in your body when I'm doing the sound. I'm not just playing. That's the other thing too. I think like it's the most accessible for people coming, but it's also the most accessible for practitioners. And so there's so many people who said like, oh, I've had a terrible experience with sound bath, or like just practitioners not being accountable to, okay, what is this opening up? And am I equipped to hold a space for what I'm opening up? And also, do I understand how to ground people back down to close people down and really leave them in a place where they feel covered? Or, you know what I mean? So there's just so much to it that I I don't know why I feel a personal accountability to it, but my teacher was a really good teacher who taught me. I mean, I actually have my sound practitioner like notebook here. And for those who are listening, you won't see this, but if you're on video, Lord, if you're on video, you'll see like this is not like, a 2 hour training that we went through, you know what I mean? Like this. And so I take that stuff personally. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I appreciate you naming that. It's one of the reasons. So I have a energy and sound healing training, and it's one of the reasons why folks, when they register for it, and we're sort of flowing through the modules, it's like, yeah, we're not touching instruments to like the third
Yeah.
module, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot that we need to talk about first in terms of like space holding and container building and like grounding to get folks into the space to understand, even for the fact that like yes, this is a great entry point, and sound is very powerful and can open up a lot. So,
Yeah.
like, there's to your point, there's like a responsibility to I think with integrity hold that space because a lot of things come up for folks, right? To your point of like opening up, connecting these energy centers, that level of grounding, that level of resonance that happens in that space. I think it's important. And it's one of the things I noticed that I feel like over the pandemic, of course, like I feel like sound got a nice boom over the pandemic and in the following years because been a bit more of connection to it. And I think that as like practitioners and leaders in the space, there is a duty for us to remind people that it's more than just playing the instruments. Like it's like,
Yeah.
hey, what you need to know what else comes with this because it is way more. Like the instruments is like cool, that's great, and
a
there's
hundred
a lot else
percent.
that
And one of my teachers had to check me. It's not like I'm above reproach. I'm not saying that at all. Like I had somebody playing with my tuning forks just because they were interested. And one of my teachers was like, okay, when that lymphatic drainage starts and they start feeling stuff, are you there? Like, have you warned it? I'm like, you know what? You're right. Like even I could get caught into it sounds nice. Like, let me show you, but everything has to be accounted for. So yeah.
yeah. I know you mentioned this in one of your previous answers before. Maybe the listeners who aren't as familiar, can you talk about the term resonance?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, man. when I talked about resonance and I talked about it is literally a resounding. When something's resounding, it's sounding back to you, meaning it's echoing. So everybody has a frequency that they naturally operate at. And what will happen through force resonance or entrainment, which are just things that happen. I'll give an example. You walk into your job and immediately you recognize that your natural frequency and the frequency of the place you're entering is different. So you do what? You code switch. You walk into a party and you say, you know what? If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to have to get a drink. And you automatically try to adapt yourself to the frequency that you're entering into, right? And so that's the sign is those things aren't resonating with me naturally. So I'm gonna try to force myself into that resonance or at least exist on some level of harmony, right? Harmony is complementary, resonance is same. Okay. So um over time we do this, we go to school, we do this, we go to work, we do this, we're in certain friend groups, our mom pulls us to church that we don't resonate, whatever it is that happens over time, we actually lose our natural resonant frequency and we start to adapt to what's around us. So then we wake up one day, we say, who are we? Who am I? What am I doing? Why am I here? I don't even like this job. I don't do I like, can I trust my friends? All these questions start to happen, right? Because you're not living in resonance with your own frequency. You've adapted to all these things around you. Now, humans are extremely adaptable because they have the ability to shift between frequencies. It's a survival tactic. And actually, at its face value, a lot of it can be what I'll call neutral, meaning the example I give all the time is when women live together and their cycles sync up, that's a form of entrainment. Like it's not a bad thing necessarily, but being aware of how you're affected by the music you listen to, by the job you work, by the friends you have, by the relationship that you're in, by your conversations with your family, like what when you feel it, you know, a lot of times in your back, you're like, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't feel right. And you adapt to it, but those slight modifications throwing off the alignment in your body, literally, those slight modifications throwing off the circulation in your energy centers or your chakras, right? All those things over time are having a compiled effect on your ability to tap into your infinite within you and the infinite around you. And so that's why I do sound baths to help people kind of get back to that resonant frequency. Was that too much?
No, no, not at all. That was that was perfect. And I appreciate your examples because I think that for some folks, I know when we start getting into like the terminology, he's like, I just want to listen to something that sounds good. But it's like, no, there's actually something behind all of this.
Yeah,
Those examples are so grounding that it's like, no, I get it. Because right, we have language for it. We just don't realize it's like, oh, the vibes are off. Like I'm in this space and,
yeah.
and the vibes are off. We got language for it, right?
And it's all sound language. Like I feel
Mhm.
high strung right now. You're out of tune. The vibes are off. I like their vibe. I resonate with that. We know ourselves to be instruments. That's why all our languages sound in the first place. But it's just when somebody puts the science on it, you're like, oh no, that's too much. It's like, now you already knew that though. You know what I mean? So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, no, that's yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
100%.
Your work has taken you into like a unique like intersection of like wellness and performance. And
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
what brought you to that intersection? And can you talk a little bit about what that link is?
Yes. Okay, so a couple things there. One is I have to explain a little bit about my past life. So before I was doing this, I was leading the video team for GQ, the content player magazine. And so because of that, I was around a lot of athletes and a lot of what I call professional creatives. So actors, musicians, like just anybody in the space. And sometimes it'll not necessarily celebrity because sometimes they'll be expert producers or engineers, but they're professional creatives. But I noticed that they were dealing a lot with the same mental health strains. And a lot of it had to do with no matter what I'm experiencing internally, externally, I have to appear as if nothing is wrong. Um, and then when I look back at my own life, like in high school, I was an all-state athlete, but I also had like paintings in our permanent art collection, and I also acted, right? So I wanted something that was geared towards creatives and athletes when I built out my platform. So that's like the basis of it is I am working with people who actually need help solving something that relates to their performance. So when I started venturing into sound and understanding about the brainwave states, I realized, okay, sound bath is going to take you from your beta brainwave state, your thinking, processing brain, and also the part of your brain where your ego is most present, down to an alpha in meditation, and maybe even a theta if you're able to go that deep in a sound bath, if if the sound bath is long enough and everything like that. I also, a little bit after I did this sound, I started studying not only meditation but also performance neurology. And there's a thing called the flow state. A lot of people know it as the zone, quote unquote. It's a altered state of consciousness that is defined by complete immersion in something, that time will dilate, and the ego is less present. You feel more connected. The idea of the sense of self is lessened. If you hear athletes talk about, yo, I was in the zone, I feel like I couldn't miss. I feel like the basket was this big and all those type of things. That's flow state. We can do that in your everyday life at a 9 to 5 as well. But how you get into it is via alpha and theta brainwave state. So I say, okay, wait a minute. The chanting brings you to alpha, theta brainwave state. Meditation does this, sound bath does this, yoga does this if you're embodied in your yoga practice. But that's also the thing that you need to get into a peak performance state of your brain. Okay. People have been saying the path to wellness and optimum well-being is contradictory to peak performance state, but it's the same exact path. I'm building my practice around helping people access that in their brain through cutting edge neurology. So I work with the Flow Research Collective. Every other week, I talk to their head of neurology. I'm reading studies. I'm pressure testing my stuff with a guy who just wrote the very first textbook on peak performance neurology. And I'm also sitting in community with healers on a regular basis, with tribes people on a regular basis, and making sure that I have enough from both to be able to blend them confidently and also scientifically back. And so that's what my practice evolves around now. And that's the connection between the two.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I want to tug at a little bit more too. This idea that like wellness and sometimes some of those stillness-based practices culturally feels conflicting with the idea of like performance, right? Where we get into this whole idea is like you got to grind it out, you just got to stay up and push through and all of this. And can you talk a little bit about like that misconception? Because that's something I feel like I used to be that person. Like when I was in undergrad, before I got connected in this work, I was the person like all nighters, grinding through, pushing through, and realizing the more and more that I leaned into taking breaks, resting, finding that points of stillness, sitting in my meditation practices, like I actually can come back to my work. Like I feel like my greatest ideas come out of that space. Or when I step out of my practices and my sadhana practices, that I'm actually in a space where I feel more open and receptive creatively to sort of lean into that. So can you talk a little bit about that, like the friction there with this idea of like grind culture, wellness, performance, and all of that?
Yes, interesting that um I how can I say? It's interesting that we recognize that release and recovery is important for everything else except for our work, right? It makes no sense to me. Like you wouldn't, for example, if you're a runner, you wouldn't run a marathon every day. You wouldn't lift weights to the same body parts every day. But yet we think if we work, it'll be great. Like there's this interesting thing where we know that release and recovery is necessary, but I don't know if it's definitely cultural. I don't know if it started with ego or what is if I can just power through. But it's the law of diminishing returns, right? Like, yes, you hustle until a point, and then afterwards, your concentration is compromised, your performance is compromised, your decision making is compromised, all these things. So you're doing worse work and at a slower pace. So it actually just makes no sense. Like just from an actual like getting work done standpoint. But there's two sides of the coin, right? There's what we call hustlers and what we call bliss junkies. It's not all on the other side either, right? You just can't be sitting in I mean, not you can't be. There is a path for people who just want to be in meditation. Um, but mostly probably in a monastery or something like that, something that's more fitting for that. But so I'll say this flow state has a cycle. The first phase of that cycle is struggle. If you ever wanted to get something done and you're like, dang, I just I can't quite get into the flow. I can't quite get there. Flow is just on the other side of that struggle. So you have to struggle through that first part, right? You have to have some resilience to meet that resistance and push through it. Then you have to do a release. That release could look like a shower, a walk, a meditation, a massage. Like that's a part of it. And a lot of times when people work as creatives in corporate environments, they have that built in. They just haven't thought about it, right? Like you have a brainstorm and nothing comes out, and then you take a walk and you're like, okay, I got the idea, or something like that, right? Um, and then you're able to get into flow state. And there's a lot of triggers for flow state. You have to have, perfectly defined goals, or at least clearly defined goals. You need to um, be able to have autonomy in the work that you do. There's a bunch of different things that are triggers for flow state. And then you need a recovery. Why? Because flow state actually is a stress, not like, oh, I'm stressed, but a physiological stress. Your brain is in a hyperactive state. You're able to hone in, but you need to recover for that. Then I just think it's the culture, it's capitalism who wants us like constantly working. The idea of like set hours for work versus so you're getting judged based off of the time you put in versus the effectiveness and the efficacy of the work. But it's also something in our brain where we don't put ourselves as valuable for being. We put ourselves as valuable for doing. So we think like when we're not actively doing, we're no longer valuable to the system that we're a part of. And so a lot of my work has to do with defining purpose for people, helping people redefine value for themselves so they actually don't feel guilty for sitting still, because that's what ends up happening, right? Like you can't be present in the meditation because you feel so guilty for not doing the work right now that the meditation isn't even able to quote unquote work because you're not present in it. So it's actually pointless anyway. So that is also a big piece of it. Um, but I think it's like everything else that we're doing in the space, it's helping reframe for ourselves and reframe for the people that we work with. There is another way to think about value. There is another way to think about effectiveness at work. My goal is to help people get from, especially people in like corporate setting or more regular workday. You could probably do your 8 hours of work in 4 to 5 hours of flow state work. And then you have so much more time to pour into yourself to get into that zone that you don't have to feel guilty about it because your work is done. It'll take a while to get there. I need a couple months with you to get there, but then you'll start to see it. And the last thing I'll say on this note, there's actually a study done that um, Buddhist monks are more likely, more able to drop into flow state than high-level CEOs. Um, because they're constantly training themselves in that alpha and theta brainwave state that they can really drop into it. So think about how much more effective you would be, even though you're at the top, how much more effective you would be in that space if you were just able to give yourself permission to be still. Uh, yeah, and we just have such a young base culture, right? So like yin is just not really honored, which is a whole nother topic.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate you naming that. I feel like more and more there needs to be a greater conversation on like that link between, and I know there are folks out there doing research around it and sort of leaning into the space around like the importance of like stillness, rest, mindfulness for like leadership, because again, that idea of coming into quite often very high stress situations that leadership often provides and continuing to sort of pound at it in a way in which you're not rebounding and recovering is the reason why we have leaders out here doing the most terrible things or not necessarily moving in a space of integrity with their employees or the folks that they're serving, because there's not that balance of sort of coming back in, pouring back into themselves, coming back and really sort of realigning in that way that sometimes rest, stillness really provide us an opportunity to do.
And there's this thing, particularly with guys, around stillness of like, um, to what it really feels like is the depth of it is like we don't feel like we deserve to be still. But what I was going to say initially is, I think people see it as a sign of weakness if you need a break. And it's like, okay, that if you were out of fuel in another way, you would eat, you would sleep. So why not mentally give yourself the same break? Like I did, we have to be logical sometimes about it. Like it just doesn't make sense. Sleep is a whole nother thing. Like I'm not putting sleep to the side. Like that's nutrition, sleep is super important. Um, but I wish there was a way a common way to track it, right? Like I notice when people start tracking their sleep and they see like, oh, actually, I'm not getting as good a sleep as I thought I was, even though I may be sleeping a length that I want to, or I thought I was able to get as much out of my day off of this 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and now I'm seeing that I don't. But what's tracked gets managed. That old saying, right? Like I wish there was a way to track our effectiveness, and maybe people would really see like, okay, add a little bit of like competition or measurement in it. I feel like guys would be more likely to tap in. So I'm trying to work on that.
Yeah, you kind of touched into the next space I wanted to talk to you about is what has been your experience in one being a man in the space, but then also like connecting with and working with or bringing men into a space that often is very female woman dominant.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer in reverse order. So trying to bring men in has been a mixed bag of results, right? I think a lot of guys have been resistant to it. Um, a lot of my friends have been curious about it, but never actually pulled up. And then I have friends that once they had a one experience, they're like, okay, yeah, I have to do this. I never even understood what this was, but I appreciate it. I've had some guys have some pretty powerful experiences with uncovered memories in sound baths or seeing visions or different voices that came to them in sound baths. They're like, oh, I don't even have a meditation practice. I don't do anything like this. I didn't know I could connect to something in this way. Or, people may say, my mind is always racing. It's the one thing that actually keeps me still. But what I've tried to do to create more visibility and more of an invitation in that space is to think about, okay, how am I honoring young energy within the space, right? So, for example, a lot of wellness spaces are only lay back and receive, which is a yin energy. And it's not to say that that shouldn't be there, but how am I providing space for the attendees to actually give as well? And just like honoring in that way. Um, a friend of mine and I try to think about, he does something on a monthly basis and I do something on a monthly basis. We try to think about, is there some sort of quote unquote like leaderboard where we can track attendance and like get people into it so it becomes more competitive and not like trying to drive ego in that way, but like, hey, I'm actually putting the work in to make myself better. And I don't know when this will air, but I'm actually launching a new brand that's meant to speak more to the young energy and even framing wellness in correlation to performance is meant to be an invitation to more people as well. So that's my, I never want to have to turn down me to be in this space, right? And so I something really struck me, to be honest with you. Like I was doing an interview similar to this one, a conversation, and on the other end of it was a white woman. And when she started to post the things about it, I reposted and I asked my friend, like, yo, what'd you think? And they're like, when I heard you talking, I knew you weren't talking to me. So I tuned out. And I was like, oh wow, got away from my resonant frequency and tapped into hers, and that's not resonating with the people that I am trying to bring into the space. So I'm much more conscious now of making sure everything I do is an invitation for people that look like me. So I'm trying, man. You know what I mean? But it's not. It's not. It's so funny because let's just say yoga, for example. In America, the face of yoga is a white woman, right? It's a practice that, as it's practiced here, is starts in India, but actually comes from ancient Kemet by way of Ghana, right? And so I think also I'm trying to tell more of those stories, and I'm trained in what's known as lineage medicine. I'm a lineage medicine teacher, actually in high schools right now. But the woman who wrote the curriculum is half Sri Lankan, half Indian, but actually sat with teachers in Shaolin, in India, in Africa, and she understands the lineage of the medicine and is teaching it in that way, and also giving me language to teach it, not just literally, but through the mythology of these different places. And so thinking about the element of water or the sacral wheel through the lens of Mami Wata, you know what I mean? Or thinking about how to bring those stories through is something that I think is going to be really powerful in the next evolution of my practice as well. Um, so that's that side of the answer. As far as being a guy in the space, it's interesting, man. I think the blessing is because I know in certain ways a lot of women could talk about as being competitive and people aren't sharing resources and things. So the blessing is that I don't think people feel that energy with me because I think who they're trying to appeal to, I don't think they see me as a quote unquote threat in that way. So people have been super supportive, particularly Black women, super supportive of me and throwing me opportunities and putting my name in rooms that I'm not in. People I don't even know, like such and such gave your name for this. I have to reach out to such and such, like, oh, thank you. Like, oh, I've been seeing what you're doing. Like, thank you. That's been really great. Um, there's also those moments of like, okay, I learned Reiki in Japan, right? Where it's like actually very touch heavy. And I have to check myself of like, I don't want anybody to think that I am trying to compromise them in any type of way or compromise the medicine in any type of way. So it also makes me very aware because everybody around me is a woman for the most part, 99% of my people attending, and particularly like one-on-one, I don't think I've had one guy come in for a Reiki session yet, right? And so like being very aware of that can sometimes take me out of what I'm trying to do, just being conscious of the social dynamics. So it's been a little bit tricky in that way too.
Yeah, thank you for naming that. Yeah, I just appreciate this conversation because, like, I think I mentioned in the beginning, it's like I feel seen and heard because
Yes,
a
I
lot of
see.
what,
For
a
those who
lot of
listen to
what,
Sean face, like, wait a minute, is this me?
yeah,
Like
man,
Spider-Man
listen,
meme.
right, right, because naming a lot of that of like, I feel you on the balance of that where it's like it feels like navigating the space in one hand feels easy because it's not a lot of us in the space. And so I think other folks from other identities don't, to your point, look at us as like, oh, that's not a threat, different lane, different work, cool. And one also shout out, because same for me, shout out to the Black women that be speaking names into rooms and
Hmm.
spaces. Thank y'all.
Black
Shout out.
women, Latino women been,
Yes,
just like to
yes.
be specific, like that's what's really moved my practice forward. So shout out to y'all.
And then it's like the flip side is there's also sort of a hyper awareness of your masculinity being in the space. Because for me, that was a big block on actually doing Reiki. And even now, I think last year I did Thai massage training. And for me, there was a bit, one of the things that I talked to my teacher about very specifically is this is a space for me to really explore um, my dynamic, and I'll probably say baggage around touch, because for
Mm-hmm.
me there was a nervousness around that, because of realizing that, cool, when I finish this Thai massage training, I know what the wellness landscape is. My clientele will be women. So
Yeah.
what does it feel like to navigate that, where it doesn't feel awkward, where it doesn't feel like it's taking you out of it? Because even circling back to the point of resonance, that comes through in the space holding, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so figuring out how to sort of work with that, because I never want to be, and I remember my very first Reiki session that I did, um, did the Reiki session, had a little chat with her afterwards. And I was like, how was everything? And she was like, it was fine. She was like, were you okay? Because I noticed your hands were shaking. And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, just working through the nerves of the situation.
Yeah.
Right. And so part of that for me has always been like a thing in the back of my mind of ensuring that when there are those practices, modalities that include touch in some
Mm-hmm.
ways, how can you stay mindful of that while not letting that sort of hijack your presence in the space?
Yeah, it's been interesting for me, and it's been done on a case by case basis. I would say this, like when I learned Reiki in Japan, it's a full body scan with touch everywhere on all chakras, right?
Mhm.
So even just thinking about getting into sensitive areas there, but also it's turnover. Okay, let's do the same thing on the back. And I've yet to, outside of somebody I personally know, I've yet to turn anybody over because I'm just like that. Just I know how Reiki's practiced in the West. I know it doesn't involve that. I've been to plenty of Reiki practitioners, and I never want somebody to think, "Oh, he tried to do something," or like, no. This is literally how I learned it in a random small mountain town in Japan, but I can't like I don't still don't feel comfortable doing that. And it is to me there's much too much at stake.
Mhm.
And for us to be in this space and be who we are in this space, I never want to do anything that would jeopardize people looking at the legitimacy of what I'm doing, because it's really important to me to honor the medicine, the lineage of the medicine, that people. And because that's what I stand for, and integrity through this, and also like elimination of ego, I'm never going to say it should be like this because it should, like, no, there's cultural things that I'm trying to take into account. And like you said, part of it is baggage. So I'm also aware of like, I think there will be a time when I could do it without feeling that way, but that's not where I'm at. So I'm not going to force myself to do it, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you naming that. There's one part of the Thai yoga sequence that I'm like, cool, I could work with all this. Those two areas I'm not doing. Like in my
Yeah.
mind, when we were doing our clinic, I was watching, I'm like, I get you. Not doing that. I'm all good.
I hear you, but I don't
So
feel you. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. Look, Brendon, as we start to bring this conversation to a close, one of the things I want to ask, especially for like the listeners who may be curious around sound, or
yeah.
figuring out maybe their entry point or way to continue to explore it, what's a tip that you would give to folks who feel a calling, feel very curious about sound, but are looking for maybe step one into that journey?
Mm. I would say I was listening to actually Michael Beckwith's podcast, and he had on I I'm gonna mispronounce her name, but she is the essentially she's the chief of the Cherokee. The Venerable Iwahu is her last name. I think it's Yanni Iwahu. She said something very powerful, which was, I don't so much believe things, I test them. And I bring that up now to say, if you're feeling called to sound, start to work with sound, but do it on you. Like, sit with your voice, buy a bowl. I'm trying to think of like some of the lower entry point things. Like if you buy one bowl, your own voice is a powerful thing. and understand, it's almost a practice in interoception. How do you feel when you hear this tone? Like, what's happening? You can even do tuning forks. I know I mentioned like the kind of a warning with tuning forks. I say get the tuning forks and some sort of guide that aligns with the tuning forks that you have, right? Like I didn't use tuning forks until I read the book Human Tuning by Dr. Michael Below, right? So like think about get some knowledge with it, but your voice, you don't need to learn anything about it. You just need to explore it with curiosity so that you can feel like, what's in you. But sit with it. First part of Reiki training is doing Reiki. Level one of Reiki is doing Reiki on yourself, right? And so like it's I would say the more you intimately get to know it, you don't want to be an expert in water who's never been wet. I'll just
Mm.
put it like that. So I would sit with it. And then once you figure out how it makes you feel, how different tones resonate, where you feel it in your body, what may be jumping out at you, what may be feeling better, what may be stirred up, then you could decide like, hey, do I want to practice this with other people? Is this a me thing? Is this a thing I want to give? And then I would just say search out for um, a teacher that you feel like is going to do right by you. And what I mean by that is prepare you to hold space, to combine sound like with maybe a breath work or meditation so that people feel like they're whole and complete in their practice when they leave. That's going to teach you different instruments and not just how to play them, but why they do the things that they do. Like find somebody that's not a 2 hour thing. You know what I mean? No, it's honest. Like,
Hmm.
um, it it scares me that people learn all three levels of Reiki in a day. It scares me that people learn sound because the people who are coming to you, some of them are coming to relax. They just want to, but some of these people are coming because they're heavy. They feel like they didn't have another option. Some of these people don't even know why they're here, and they're going to start crying in the middle of your session for the next 30 minutes. And if you're not prepared as a practitioner to hold that space, to be that container for what's ever happening, it's a disservice to you. And so I think people paying for these certifications who aren't really equipped are then put in situations that they can't handle. And I don't blame them because there's a culture around that. And maybe the pandemic started that with like, we'll just do this virtually and we'll do it for a couple hours or whatever it is. But I'm blessed that I don't remember, I think 40 hours is what I did for my sound healer training. I'm blessed that I was down in Japan for a week to learn the Reiki. And like, that was just the first two levels. Like I had to come back to do level three, right? So anyway, I say that to say, do it for yourself first, but also find somebody who's going to teach you what you don't know in a way that you feel like is a complete teaching so that you can be of service. Because the whole thing that you want to do as a practitioner is create value, right? That's the whole thing. I want to be in service to this community, to this house, and to be of service, I need to have value. And that value, what you put into gaining that value is what you're going to be able to deliver. So that's my advice.
Listen, that's great advice.
I felt like I
Great.
was preaching for a second, but
You were, but it needed to be said. So it needed to be said. So I appreciate you naming that. Yeah, I feel like every time somebody talks to me about sound healing, what you just shared is like I be saying the same thing. I'm like, look, sit with it with you. It looks cute on Instagram, but is this really your jam, right? So like
it looks
figure out
great on Instagram.
it
And
looks nice.
there's a woman who's in my sound bath almost every time I have one in LA. And she remember like, what bowl should I buy? And I'm like, well, what do you plan to do? It's like I just want to sit with myself. I'm like, okay, boom. Like, but there's certain things like, but like understand what is it about it that's pulling you in. And I'm not telling anybody not to do it. Like, I think the more that people are understanding what sound can do, the better. So I'm all for it. Um, but understand, man, it's not, it's like learning magic, right? You just can't be doing random tricks here and there, and then people people start disappearing, and you're like, wait, what happened? I can't bring him back yet. Like, oh, yeah, maybe you should have learned. Maybe you should have said with that. I never watched Harry Potter, but something about Hogwarts, like you gotta go through the gotta go through the thing. I don't know
Right.
if that makes sense. Never
It
mind.
does. It does, man. How can my listeners get in contact with you?
I would say find me on Instagram. Brendon Lives, Brendon Lives, is probably the best way. I mentioned like I have some brands and things changing, so I would say that it's intact, and then you'll be able to follow the journey over the next couple months of how things evolve. And I always post events there and everything like that. So yeah, I would say that's the easiest way to get in contact with me. Brendon Lives on Instagram.
Perfect. So for everybody that's listening or watching, whatever you're doing, click down in the show notes or the description, and that contact information will be there. Do yourself a favor, follow. Um, Brendon, thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thank
This was
you.
this was a role reaffirming conversation. So thank
Man,
you.
likewise. I don't get to talk to many brothers doing this, so man, I appreciate you, man.
Same.
This is great. Thank you for creating a
Same.
platform.
Thank you so much, man. Hey, Rebels, thank you for joining us on another episode of the Mindful Rebel podcast. Remember, after this listen, ask yourself where wisdom can meet practice and where compassion can meet action. Take a moment today to reflect on what resonated with you in this episode. Now, if you're feeling that rebel spirit, I'd invite you to like and share this episode. Your support helps spread the message of mindfulness, self-inquiry, and self-discovery. And if you're feeling extra generous, and I know you are, leave a rating and a review of the podcast. It helps others find this resource on their own mindfulness journey. May you move into the rest of your day with a greater sense of peace, clarity, and freedom.